Hello, I'm Jim Demmon with Clark County Close-Up. Thank you both for meeting with us today.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's nice to be here.
Now, today should be your last meeting. We're taping this interview hours before the final meeting of the Board of Freeholders. So both of you, you've spent 6 months kind of drafting the charter and now going to make the vote for the final to approve it. Are you satisfied with the product?
Yeah, I think I am. All along, what I've sought to accomplish is to keep something very simple so that it's not complicated, so that we can get the issue before the voters, that they can make this very important decision to move in a different direction as far as county governance. And then there's mechanisms within the charter itself to make additional corrections down the road if that's believed to be needed along the way. So we worked very hard to keep it to a handful of big moving pieces that are easily understood, I think, that are good governments that most people should appreciate, and then leave the rest for somebody else to kind of unwind down the road.
Nan?
Well, I'm not only very pleased with the product, which Joe has just talked about, but I'm also delighted with the process. It's been what I had hoped it would be, civil, respectful, thoughtful process that's led us to a very moderate, simple product, and I'm very proud of that.
Right. Well, just to catch viewers up, kind of each of you tell us a little bit about your background and why you decided to join this process. Joe, I want to start with you.
Well, for me, I served in state government for the last, before the last 2 years, about 16 years in the state senate. Was very familiar with different viewpoints, and worked hard the last several years to kind of bring those together. So I thought I could serve the committee well in trying to give some direction, and not arguing, but making a case for certain aspects and kind of bring that coalition together. And I think that I've had some impact and success in that area.
Okay. Nan, how about you?
Well, I come from a local government background, and I, through that, have developed some skills that I saw in leadership and facilitation that might be helpful to this process. And my goal was to make sure the process was a good one.
Okay, and then a quick, just for someone who might be hearing Home Rule Charter the first time, quickly, what does a Home Rule Charter do? What is it and what does it do?
Well, one of the biggest things it does is our current form of government was established in 1889 in the Washington State Constitution. And back then, we had 11,700 or so citizens. Well, then by 1948, there were people in large areas of the state that felt that this form of government just wasn't working for their higher populations in different counties. So the citizens actually passed an initiative using the initiative process to amend the Constitution to provide for Home Rule Charter, which gives the citizens in a county the opportunity to design their own government structure. They still have to comply with state law, but they can design their own.
Okay.
Anything?
Yeah, I would just go a little further and say that you really have two choices, and that is to take what the state gives you in statute, which is what we've lived by, or this kind of hybrid where you have to live within state law, but there are options then that the local people get to choose about self-governance. So the Home Rule Charter is about establishing those areas outside of state law that allow for a greater form of self-governance by the people in the county, and that's what they'll be getting an opportunity to look at.
And additionally, what Joe said earlier about also provides the flexibility to have that charter evolve in the future by future citizen charter commissions and voters' approval, so that it's not in concrete like our current form has been for
1800s.
Yeah. Let's do the math.
Years, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's go through some of the elements of the charter, and we'll kind of go through each one. And as we go through, I'll ask you what our current form of government is, or how the current process works, and how it will change. So let's first talk about the charter proposes that on January 1, 2015, the legislative and executive powers will be separated into two branches. So how does that differ from what currently we have?
Well, currently what you have is a 3-commissioner board who is both executive and legislative branch. So 2 of those 3 members can anytime choose to do whatever they want within county government. The goal here is to do a separation of powers so that you have a legislative body and then you have some form of an executive, except in this case, that legislative body will get to hire and fire the executive. But in this scenario that we've devised, there's a bit of a firewall around that. There's got to be reasoning around that, so there's freedom for that individual to act somewhat like an executive and run the day-to-day operations of county government. This, in my opinion, allows you to have professional leadership in the day-to-day operations, and the legislative branch that is more politically driven to listen to the public and give input and direction via ordinance that they may pass through the legislative process. In the past, I think, where we've gotten in the enormous size that the county has grown to, and as it continues to grow, that it's a little condensed to have two people have all the control over what happens in the county at all levels, both from a personnel perspective as well as from a governance perspective.
Okay. So the charter also proposes moving from 3 full-time commissioners, which you currently have, to 5 part-time county council members, correct? Tell me about this proposal.
I think that that was the one item that was basically universally agreed upon by our board. The fact that 3 people may have been fined for $11,700, but was inadequate for our $444,000. So what we did in creating 4 districts and designing it so that the folks in that district could elect their own representatives, we hope will give the citizens a feeling of more ownership and leadership in their county.
Okay. So 4 districts, that's the way it'll be divided. How will the chair be selected?
Countywide vote. So you have a 5th person that's at large countywide, so everybody will vote for that 5th person. So you'll really vote for 2 people. Your district representative, that it will be a member of the board, and then a 5th, who's equal in all senses to the other 4, except holds the position of chair, and as a countywide elected person, would be more the voice of the council to be able to integrate or to work with state government and other entities as needed.
And the term of the chair and the rest of the councilors?
4 years.
4 years, 4-year terms.
In the transition, that there might be a 3-year term for a couple folks, but that's just to get it to the normal 4-year cycle.
So again, the difference is that right now, 3 commissioners. In the primary election, you vote per district for your commissioner, but in the general, you vote for all commissioners.
Right.
This is going to change. 5 councilors. You're going to be able to vote for the chair and the member from your district.
Correct.
Correct.
So 2. Okay. Okay. Now, you also are talking about lowering the pay of the council members to $53,000 annually. Why?
Well, as it is now, you have 3 people. And by dividing the governance structure so you really have a legislative branch and then an executive branch, you really reduce the amount of time that legislative body needs to put in. Very similar to the state legislature. It becomes not part-time, it's going to be full-time work, but not as much of a workload. And so by making that transition, reducing the workload significantly and moving a lot of that over to a hired county manager, we believe that commensurate pay is in the range that we've established it at. In the end, the public gets 5 commissioners for less than the price of 3.
And I think that one of the ways that Joe had explained it during the process was we basically said this is the number that's 25% more than what a legislator makes. So we kind of based it off that.
Try to use something to connect it to, and I think there's a good balance there of how we approach that.
Okay. Now, so let's talk about the county manager. How, again, that person will be selected by the
Council itself. We looked very seriously at an elected executive, but the majority of the group felt that so many of the models that used the executive, not only was it a more expensive approach with the 2 branches beefing up staff, but it was also a divisive approach, that it was the I'll veto this and you override my veto and all that. And we really want, even though there's the separation of powers, we want those two branches working toward a common vision for Clark County. And that model seemed to do it better.
Absolutely, because that manager knows that he or she can be hired, or is hired, but can be fired too. Now it requires 3 of the 5 members to make that transition. So there's got to be a happy balance there of working together to have satisfaction across both sides of the aisle, so to speak. So we thought it is a good balance moving forward.
And as Joe pointed out earlier, if we find after 5 years or 15 years that this is not an adequate step, that there's still not enough separation of powers, or that we've grown to 750,000, then the future charter commissions and the voters can choose a different form.
Right.
Let's just give some quick examples of the kind of powers the executive, that this county manager will have.
Well, the county manager is responsible for all the day-to-day operations, so he or she would hire and fire all staff, be responsible for all the HR policy, hire the department heads, be responsible for the oversight of those agencies, be responsible to implement the laws passed by the county and by the state and federal government, would be responsible for all of that day-to-day activity. So that would be a big move as far as the burden that's currently on what is a legislative authority / executive branch all rolled up in one.
And currently Clark County has an administrator.
Right.
How does this position differ?
I think a lot of people don't understand that the administrator has the responsibility of day-to-day operations, but does not have the authority. The authority still sits with the 3 commissioners. So in effect, every county employee has at least 4 bosses, many times divergent viewpoint about what the person should be doing.
Right. So you could have a scenario where you have a department head who is having to take direction under the current form of government from 3 different people with 3 different opinions, and you can see how that can create kind of a problem as far as how smooth things operate. In this way, the administrator would do that hiring, so there'd be a one-on-one direction, and so the vision and the direction and the responsibility of those individuals would be more of a one-on-one as traditionally in any type of employment situation. So there's none of this who do I listen to type of stuff going on.
Okay. Let's, the charter also lays out the processes for initiative and referendum. Can you briefly run this proposal by us?
Basically, there's a little different, I can't remember the percentages between initiative and referendum. Do you have those in your mind?
Actually,
Did we end up
both
using the same
we end
number?
up with a 10%. And it gives I don't know if some people don't realize that currently in Clark County there is no provision for local initiative and referendum. So what this does is it gives the citizens an opportunity, but it sets the threshold high enough that there won't be frivolous abuse of that opportunity, and at the same time will provide the opportunity if enough people believe that they wish to make law through initiative or rescind law through the referendum process.
Now that wouldn't give them the authority to change state law, of course. So it would be
Yeah.
only concerning those items that are county-based ordinances, where the public would have the ability to redress government, just like we do at the state level, whether you agree with it or not. They all have equal access to redress that and cause, if the percentage of support is there, to have that measure put on a ballot for consideration by the public in whole. I think it's good public policy. It's worked well. Whether you agree or disagree at the state level, there's things that have happened that people appreciate and things that they don't like, and you take the good with the bad, but that's what governance is about. That's what self-governance is about.
Okay. We've mentioned it a number of times, the ability for the charter to go through updating processes.
Yes.
Just really quickly, how's that process work?
I think that that's one of the most important elements of the whole charter, is the fact that it can be amended as the citizens so choose in the future. We have 3 mechanisms to do that, but there's one major one, and that is that the charter specifies that in 5 years after it's passed, and then at least every 10 years after that, the citizens will vote for a charter review commission, exactly like they picked us. And that board will review the entire charter and determine if there are changes that would be appropriate at that time. We left lots of things that some of our members would have loved to have approached now, such as changing offices from partisan to nonpartisan and lots of others. Those are all things that can be done in the future.
All right.
Extremely healthy.
Now the devil's in the details. You also got down to transition. So how's the process work for transitioning to this new form of government?
That's where it gets a little messy,
Okay.
because going from one form of government to another, there are always difficulties in transition. But what it basically says is, as of January 1 of 2015, that's coming January 1st, the form of government will change.
Again, legislative,
And,
executive. Okay.
Yes, the legislative authority will be created and then called the council, and the county administrator will become the acting county manager. And then during 2015, through the primary and general election process, the 2 new members will be elected, so that by the beginning of 2016, all 5 seats will be filled. And at that point, then a permanent county manager can be selected by the Board of 5.
Oh, okay.
And also, another sticky wicket was getting from a higher salary to a lower salary. So what this does is the 2 commissioners who are currently sitting, Milky and Medor, will continue to make their current salary through the end of 2016 when their term ends. The person elected this November will make the same salary as they do through that period of time also. So those 3 will have the same. And the new people will be elected at the lower level, and that person that's elected this November will, at the end of 2016, have their salary decreased to that of everyone else, so that by the beginning of 2017, everyone will be at the lower amount.
Okay.
And that was just a process of, once you're hired or elected in this case at a particular wage, it's very difficult to kind of go back through that door. So it was probably the thing we juggled with more in the later meetings is how do we, what's the balancing act there we do? You know, we felt at the end of the day, as long as you're running for office and you know this is what it is, then that's fair. Once you're in office and to change it, maybe that's not so fair. So this is kind of what we end up. There was at least a dozen different ways you can go with it.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. I mean, 15 people coming up with the consensus. I mean, it must have been quite the challenge.
Yeah.
So tonight you're going to be voting on it. So assuming let's say the vote is yes, and the assumption is going that, what are the next steps?
Well, we say yes or no, and based on the conversation, I don't think we'll have a problem getting it out. It's a matter of whether we have a 100% vote on it. And then that will go over to the auditor, who will be responsible for putting it on the ballot. And then it'll be published in the voters pamphlet, as well as I think there'll be some pros and cons, I'm sure, by different groups. And it'll simply go on the ballot in November for people to consider.
And it'll be a simple majority vote, yes or no?
Majority, yes or no, and all one vote. There won't be parts this time.
Okay.
You get a yay or a nay.
All right.
And
So
that's why
if
we
you
try
yay-
to keep it real simple.
Right.
There's really 3 big moving parts here, going from 3 to 5 on the council, going to some type of a county manager that's kind of separated, more of an executive, yet hired and fired by that board. So there's the crossover of the 2. And then the third thing is adding an initiative and a referendum to it. Those are the 3 big moving pieces, and the rest are just parts that we had to do to make it all work and fit together. So there's not a lot going on. There's a lot to read, but even there we've tried to not duplicate information. I mean, one of my pet peeves was, why do we recite things that are already in state law? If it's state law, we don't need to say it in here, because people have a habit of reading something and they think you're creating something. So we worked real hard to only put things in that are actual words that change things rather than words that repeat things.
Okay.
To keep it kind of slim and to the point and make sense so that people know that what they're reading is what they need to be concerned with, and not things that really make no difference in the vote.
Okay. So how can voters learn more about this home rule charter process? Home rule charter. Any outreach plans?
We have a website that we have maintained throughout this process. And the easiest way, I believe, to get to it is to go to www.clark.wa.gov. And then over on the right-hand side, there's a box that references Charter Freeholders. Click on that, and it opens up the whole world of the whole process we've gone through. It'll also have a copy of the full charter itself, a summary statement with questions and answers, frequently asked questions, if you don't want to read the whole thing. It will give voters an opportunity to get that factual basis. And we also are going to include in the voters pamphlet a 2-page, totally factual, unbiased, this is a summary statement of what this does. Because in the back of the voters pamphlet will be the whole thing. But if you're not inclined to read our wonderful work, here is what it does. We looked at the possibility of sending a mailer, but even the most basic postcard looked like it was going to cost almost $40,000. So we said, no, we're not going to do that. Now, we may be able to figure out other more technology-based ways of getting factual information out. I know the Chamber has offered to put out some little stipends on what this is the fact, not pro or con.
But once we make the vote tonight, we're officially dissolved.
We are dead.
So we as a group don't have any privilege to do anything other than what we might do as individuals. So I think it's going to be up at that point to the various service groups and organizations that have influence or want to hear from us to maybe invite members to their meetings and to talk to people and that type of thing. So that really the burden's going to be on the public to try to understand it, or what we choose to do as individuals, as public citizens. So.
Okay. All right. And cbtv.org covered, I think, all the freeholders,
Yes,
so
that
people
was great.
can tune in there or watch online to get also more information.
And there were also a couple little focus pieces along the way that gave good information about the whole process if folks want to check that out.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for all your work on this board, and we really appreciate your time and showing up for these different interviews we've done.
I appreciate that. If I could just add one thing at the end, I just want to let everybody know that Nan has done a marvelous job as chair. And I don't know where we'd been if we didn't have her to keep things straightened out. I gave a little advice along the way, but it's all her doing. So she's done a marvelous job.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Joe. And the committee's done a great job, too.
Thank you both.